Hi, my name is Jonathan Pennington, and in these two talks, we'll be talking about emotions, how to educate our emotions, especially from a Christian perspective. I like to start, though, by putting it back on you. Let me start with an opening exercise. I'd encourage you to pause, and if you want to pause the video, you can. But I'd like you to pause and pay attention, and even maybe write down, what are your primary emotions right now? A little tip on that. We have a lot of words. We have many words for emotions in our English vocabulary. You can see Plutchik's wheel there. This is one psychologist who's put together and tried to organize our emotions and different synonyms and various words we use for them into different categories. But I think a lot of us would say that you can group all of our emotions into 5 big categories: mad, sad, glad, afraid, and ashamed. But moving beyond right now, if you want to pause again and think, what emotions are you feeling? What are you aware of? Maybe you can think more broadly about your life. When you wake up each day, what emotions are dominant for you? Well, as we start to think about emotions, maybe you feel comfortable, maybe you feel uncomfortable thinking about them. I think we all have to acknowledge that emotions are an ever-present part of our lives. They're an essential part of really what it means to be human. Emotions are, whether we realize it or not, affecting us all the time. Emotions are a powerful and really inescapable part of what it means to be human. Emotions are this mysterious power that drives us humans to love, to kill, to marry, to divorce, to buy things we can't afford, to drink too much, to worship invisible deities. All of these things are motivated by various emotions. Some people are simply more attuned to their emotions, whether it's for genetic reasons, personality, upbringing. Maybe you grew up in a home where emotions were strongly encouraged and not controlled at all. Maybe you grew up in a home where all emotions were tamped down. But learned responses, various circumstances, all of these affect our emotional responses and our awareness of them. Artists in our society often help us pay attention to our emotions, whether it's painters or sculptors. You can see on the screen here this famous French sculptor, Maillot, and a couple of powerful emotions, or powerful sculptures expressing very strong emotions in the form of sculpture. Or you can think of my beloved Taylor Swift and her best song, or any of her songs really, but one of her best songs, All Too Well, where she says, "And I know it's long gone, and there's nothing else I could do, and I forget about you long enough to forget why I needed to." Great lines, especially you have to listen to the whole song, but great lines that help you. This is what artists help us do. They help us figure out our own emotions. They help us name our emotions. They actually help us enter into our emotions, especially when we're blocked. That's the power of a song that you listen to before you step out on the stage, or before you step out on the basketball court, or when you're alone in your room and you feel like crying. Songs, artists help us through songs and sculpture and paintings to get connected with our emotions. Here's the key principle, that if we aren't aware of, and if we don't learn to address our emotions, they will actually continue to affect us because we're driven by them always. But if we don't deal with them, those emotions will often come out sideways. A key reality of soul care, of psychology, of spiritual soul care, is that whatever we don't process and learn to process internally comes out externally. What we don't learn to face head on eventually comes out sideways. And friends, that's largely driven by our emotions. Our emotions are always present, and they're affecting our lives, but even more so now. I mean, at any time and stage of life, but in a season we've been in our country in recent months, it's an incredibly emotional and tumultuous time. So here's the question. What really are our emotions? What are our emotions? Well, thank God for streaming services because it enables us to watch lots of things whenever we want. And a newer one in this year has been, of course, Disney Plus. And in addition to the beloved Baby Yoda, one of the good things about Disney Plus is the ability to go back and watch and savor really some of the great Pixar movies that they have as part of their world now. Several weeks ago, my youngest daughter and I, watched again a movie we hadn't seen for years, and that is Inside Out. And It's wonderful, with much laughter and tears. And I'd really forgotten just how engaging and powerful of a film it is. How really remarkably insightful Inside Out is into the human soul. I mean, it's a remarkable piece. And in fact, along with Toy Story and Up and a few others, I think Inside Out is Pixar at one of its narratival, creative best moments. If you haven't seen it, apologies for a bit of a spoiler alert here. I guess you could skip this part or pause it, go watch it, and come back. But on the other hand, if you haven't seen it, I don't know what you're doing with your life. So sorry, not sorry. So the Inside Out title refers to the way in which the story itself, as told by Pixar, alternates between the outside of Riley, who is this happy and active 11-year-old girl, and what's going on inside her head/emotions. And the movie constantly cuts back and forth to this control room. This is the metaphor they use, that inside Riley is this big control room with a control panel where there are 5 emotions that live there that control things. For them, the 5 emotions they come up with are a little different than the ones I gave you. They are joy, sadness, fear, disgust, and anger. And they're perfectly cast. I mean, it's a wonderfully done movie. So they have stars like Amy Poehler as Joy and Phyllis Smith from The Office, whose sadness is just perfect. Mindy Kaling from The Office, and she's disgust. So they're really well cast. And not only is the story engagingly told, it includes just really great moments, right? Really funny lines, like when they get to California and they encounter broccoli pizza, Anger gets activated and says, "Congratulations, San Francisco, you've even ruined pizza." So there's some really funny moments like that. But profoundly, like any good narrative, the movie actually functions at several levels. There's the narrative story level that any kid can follow, and it is a kid's movie. But there's always also, as in all good literature and good films, a deeper insight that the movie communicates about the nature of who we are, about the nature particularly of our emotions. And it's really a psychological message about our feelings and thoughts, our lives, and what it means to be happy for adults. It's that significant of a plot and a message of the movie. And at one climactic scene, Riley, this 11-year-old girl, she is completely overwhelmed with the emotions of anger and disappointment and hurt, and she's getting on a bus to run away. And what's really insightful is that the emotions console inside of her, that again is run by these different emotions, it goes completely dark, and they can't make her feel anything. And this is really representing this depth of depression, that she's so depressed and she's in such a dark space, even the emotions are sort of shut down because she's so overwhelmed. It's a powerful metaphorical way to describe the depths of a depressed person's psyche, just truly shut down emotionally. Maybe you've experienced that, or you know people that have. And even more profoundly, and this really proves to be central to the story, at that moment, this is so insightful, it's actually sadness, not joy, that saves the day by making Riley feel something again. It's not just joy is the answer to everything, but actually when she begins to get connected to her sadness, and she moves from having a dark console to starting to come alive again, and it motivates her to action, to get off the bus and go back home. Now, at the heart of the movie's vision for what it means to be human and to be happy is the idea that the emotion characters inside of Riley must come to realize that maturity looks different than childhood. In childhood, joy and happiness is the main goal and really the primary emotion. But through her various experiences at this crucial time of life at age 11, Riley matures to the point where her core memories, that is, these foundational parts of her psyche that build and shape her personality, on what they call the islands of personality, she comes to experience that the point is not just that happiness is the only place that life is found, but actually life is found in a mixture of sadness and joy. And in fact, the depth of who we are becomes this marbled reality of both blue and yellow, joy and sadness. And the point is that being a mature, stable human, for that to be true of us, all of our emotion, all the feels, if you will, are part of what it means to be fully human. And then, at the end of the story, after all the trauma and this new stage of maturity is reached in Riley, the islands of personality are rebuilt for her, and the former more simplistic, this is what's a great image, this former more simplistic emotions console that just had 5 emotions is replaced by this super complicated and nuanced one with all these different emotional responses to things that are much more mature and mixed and complicated and nuanced. And in fact, in maturity, Riley is not just our happy little girl, but is learning to be a fully emotional being. And that's what it means to be human, and that's what it means to be mature. A mixture of our emotions, not just childish joy, as good as joy is. Now, I open with this little exegesis of the movie Inside Out because I think it's such a beautiful and insightful approach to the complex and really universal human question of what role do emotions actually play in our human experience. Well, let's turn to the experts and ask ourselves that. Now, our English word emotions is often negative, actually, and distinguished from rational thinking. As the Oxford English Dictionary goes on to define emotions, emotions are strong feelings, passion, instinctive feeling, as distinguished from reason or knowledge. So that's a very interesting and I think unfortunate definition of emotions, but one that is probably how we use it, and that's what the OED is trying to give us. I think of the pastor Mark Schlesky and an exercise he talks about in a book he wrote. He points this out. He said, if you were to say to someone, or I'll ask it this way, if I were to say to you, how would you feel if I said to you, you seem very emotional today, versus if I said to you, you seem to be very rational today? Well, that's not just a simple data question. That's a very loaded question that actually has a pretty heavy value judgment in it, that emotional is bad and rational is good. Now, the residential experts today on our emotions are psychologists, neurologists, psychiatrists, counselors, and therapists. What do they say about emotions? Well, there's actually two very different responses from the experts about what emotions are for the modern human. Some experts would describe emotions purely neurologically and physiologically. They would describe emotions as merely a function of body chemicals, so that what we describe as emotions, according to these experts, are really just perceived changes in our body, such as heart rate, breathing rate, hormones, adrenaline in your blood, etc. And then, so we experience these physiological and neurological realities, and then we call them, with our very sophisticated brains, we call them emotions, but they're really just chemicals. Other experts, however, would understand emotions on a more psychological side as instead a function, the response to mental expectations and outcomes. So, in this view, happiness occurs when our experiences match our expectations. Sadness occurs when our experience does not match our expectations. Anger comes when someone or something is perceived as blocking our desires or expectations. Emotions then are a function of a mental state, our minds, not just our brains and hormones. Now, as the wonderful theologian Kevin Van Hooser astutely observes when he's reflecting on these two different options, theories of emotions tend toward one kind of reductionism or the other. Some theorists, some experts reduce emotions upwards and make emotions only about mental states, and some experts reduce emotions downwards, making them only about physical states. Who's right? Well, it's complicated because part of our problem is linguistic. Part of our problem is one with our words. Our word emotions has come to occupy a mental space that I think brings more confusion than clarity. As my elderly mother would say, the word emotions is too big for its britches. Or maybe better, emotions is too blunt of a tool, I think, the way we use the word emotions, is too blunt of a tool to do the kind of exploratory surgery necessary to describe the very complex human soul. Ancient philosophers and theologians actually made an important distinction that we have lost, between passions, which was what they would describe as these sort of quasi-physical forces that move people somewhat mysteriously. They describe one word, passions, and another word, affections. Of course, they weren't using English words, but these are our translations of them. Affections, which were something more like thoughts of the heart that affect the will. So they had this more nuanced idea that there are two different things that we kind of use the one word emotions for, these quasi-physical forces and these thoughts of the heart that affect our will. our singular word emotion really now attempts to function in both of these spaces, and I don't think it does very well as a result. So I also have a problem with the way we think about the word emotions with this heart versus head difference, and I don't have time to get into all of this, but the simple way to say it is every language and every culture uses body metaphors differently. So you have to be really careful when you translate. So even though the Greek word cardia, and you can hear cardio in it, gets translated into English with heart, that doesn't mean that what they conceived of the metaphor of heart to refer to some part of human experience, you can't assume that what they meant by that is what we mean by heart, because for us, heart just means emotions, especially romantic a lot of times. Well, that's an English thing that happened in the 14th century and later, and that's not exactly the way that metaphor functions, for example, in Greek and, for example, in the Bible, where heart actually means something more like the inner person, including affections and thinking, not emotions versus rationality. So you have to be really careful, especially if you're a Christian and you're reading the Bible and you see an English word. You can't assume that that English word functions in the same mental space that it does for us that it did in the Bible. So while the experts today are neurologists and therapists and counselors and psychiatrists and psychologists, they have very different opinions, but they are not always very nuanced, and they tend towards this reductionism as well. And notice also that one of the things that I think is very problematic about our experts on emotions today is that they largely see emotions as a problem to be dealt with. That if anyone is having a negative emotion, rather than processes of lament, etc., typically emotions are seen as any negative emotion is seen as an inherently bad thing that must be gotten rid of. And that's very different than it was thought of in biblical times and the ancient world. Now, in the ancient world, where humans had emotions just like us, religions, but especially philosophers, so religious experts, but especially philosophers, were actually the experts on emotions. And they thought a lot about the issue of emotions. The ancient philosophers, people like Plato and Aristotle, and later philosophers like Seneca and others, they very consciously addressed the issue of emotions because they realized, we'll take Aristotle's example, he realized that you needed to pay attention to your emotions. You needed to learn to process them, or else you're just going to be a hedonist. You're just going to be one who lives from one emotion to another. And it's very easy to see that someone who lives purely hedonistically never comes to a settled, flourishing, virtuous life. And so they thought a lot about these issues. Now, just because they thought a lot about them, in fact, because they thought a lot about them, the different ancient philosophers didn't all have the same opinion about what emotions were or how to deal with them. And so as we think about emotions in the ancient world and emotions among the experts in the ancient world, particularly the philosophers, we can identify a few different traditions, some slightly different opinions, in some cases starkly different opinions about what emotions are. And I think it's helpful for us, before we turn to the Bible and ask, what's the Christian view of emotions and the biblical view of emotions? It's good to sort of put it in its ancient context and say, how did other ancient people think about emotions? Well, let's start with Plato. And we can call this, of course, a Platonic view of emotions. And particularly, we can kind of sum up the Platonic view of emotions as the non-cognitive tradition. What does that mean? Well, for Plato, there was a very clear distinction between reason, which did include emotions, but reasonable thinking, and passions. That word I said before, these sort of quasi-physical forces that control us in a kind of uncontrollable way. So he made a really strong distinction between reason, which is thinking primarily, and passions. And he uses this illustration of two horses. He says that the human soul is like a charioteer who is holding on to the reins of a pair of horses that are very different and are running in opposite directions. There's reason, you're thinking about things, and there are passions. And so they are enemies of each other. and that the human person needs to learn to control both of them, and particularly that horse that's the passions that are driving off in a million ways. And by the way, the only way to really control them is not with reason. This is why it's a non-cognitive tradition. The way to control emotions, these passions, are by other means, like music and poetry, physical activity, etc. Emotions are actually not controllable by reason. They are two separate horses that are running in opposite ways, and this is the human dilemma. And so you need to learn to develop your reason, and you need to learn to control your emotions, but you can't do that by reason. You have to do it in other ways. Now, from this kind of non-cognitive world, in the ancient world, a key medical idea that came in interaction with all this philosophy was the idea of the four humors, or four different liquids that are in the human body. And that became like one of the earliest forms of a personality type. Maybe you're familiar with the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs or a million others. There was a very ancient personality type that was based on a medical idea that every human consisted of four liquids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. And every person's makeup genetically was some different combination of percentage of those different four categories, in whichever one dominated you became your primary emotion, or your primary personality even. So the categories you may have heard of sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and phlegmatic are all ideas about which liquid you have in you the most, which humor. All of that, then, is part of this Platonic world of what we can call a non-cognitive view of emotions. That emotions are this thing that you can't really control. They're this thing that is not controllable by reason and is largely in you biologically, and you just have to sort of deal with it and try to develop reason apart from that. Plato's most famous student, Aristotle, ended up breaking with Plato in many, many ways on all kinds of issues, and a bunch of his writings are sort of contrasts to Plato. And he definitely broke with him on this big issue of emotions. For Aristotle, we can, looking back, call his view something more like a cognitive tradition, or a cognitive emotion tradition. Because for Aristotle, he viewed the human not as a charioteer trying to control two opposite impulses, but as one person for whom passions and cognition together made up what it means to be human in a more integrated, holistic way. And so that emotions are a function of thinking. Right? And so you can already hear how the two different modern views are very much based on these two ancient views going back to Plato and Aristotle. So an analogy I like to give is one I've made up about the steak versus brick analogy. And that is that emotions, again, are the result of cognitive and bodily perceptions. They are a function of some other perception happening. So the steak versus brick analogy is this. The idea is that if you saw a picture, or more importantly, if someone put on a plate in front of you this sizzling, perfectly browned medium, or whatever how you want your steak, with the right garnish and maybe some sides, you're hungry and the smells are coming from your nose. If somebody put that in front of you, the emotions you feel of desire, of happiness, of pleasure, are a function of your perception from past experience usually, and also some innate human things, that is going to be a good experience. It's something about us to come before you. Now, if, however, and I don't know that there were any vegetarians in the ancient world, maybe there were. If, however, you have a bunch of cognitive commitments against this bloody slab of meat that has been raised in a horrible environment with an animal that couldn't even move its neck or see side to side, pumped full of hormones, and now it's been mercilessly slaughtered and then blood cooked halfway out of it and put on this plate in this capitalistic, mercenary kind of restaurant environment. If those are your thoughts, then when that slab of steak appears at your table, you're not going to have the same positive emotions I would have. If that's your opinion, that's great. I'm going to eat the steak. But you're either way, your emotions are a function of your response to it. And if that is actually your commitment as a vegetarian or vegan, I can respect that. All my point is that our emotions are a function of cognitive perceptions and commitments. On the other hand, if we went to a restaurant and someone put before us a plate of bricks, a plate of baked adobe, right, and put it in front of you, none of us I don't think most of us are going to have any kind of positive emotions and desire and hunger we feel in our bodies for that, unless for some reason you are someone who enjoys eating clay. And I'm sure there is some psychological disorder, not that there's anything wrong with that, of people who enjoy clay. Now, I think we could say it's probably not very good for your body, but if for some reason you perceive that as a good thing, then that would actually be desirable emotions that would occur to you in that moment. But change gears here with me for a second. Let's say you live next to a river, or maybe even some distance from it. It's been raining for a week. The water's rising. It's coming towards your house. You're in danger of having your house flooded. And if someone shows up with a huge truck full of stakes, you're going to feel very differently about the benefit that's giving to you. Your emotions are going to be very different than if somebody shows up with a huge pile of bricks or sandbags, if you want to change the analogy. Either way, the point of all of this is that our emotions, according to Aristotle, are a response to our expectations. Again, not dissimilar to how many psychologists would talk today. So those are the big two traditions in the ancient world as they thought about emotions. Now, I need to say something about one more group within this, because this group that comes out of the Aristotelian tradition, but then actually has some pretty significant changes too, so it's kind of complicated, is a philosophy that came to be known as Stoicism, based on another philosophical school that was also in Athens, but then developed and became very popular in Roman society as well, under a number of people like Seneca and eventually even the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. The Stoicism philosophy became so dominant, it's like I don't even know if the influence of Oprah or something in the 90s would be comparable. Stoicism was the go-to philosophy of most people who had any sort of consciousness of these issues, probably from the 2nd century BC all the way through the 2nd century AD and in the 3rd century. It was like the really dominant philosophy in so many ways. There were always other schools, there were always other opinions, but there seemed to be a lot of people who saw the benefit of Stoicism even today. Like, I've been reading a golf psychology recently, and even though he doesn't call it this, it's almost verbatim Stoicism for modern day golfers. There's a lot of appeal to these sort of opinions. So what is Stoicism? What is the Hellenistic tradition that occurs from, say, the 3rd or 2nd century BC up through the Roman era? Well, which is, notice, the time of the writing of the New Testament and what we call Second Temple Judaism, which is very influential. What is Stoicism about? Well, interestingly, it has a lot of similarities to Buddhism or modern day practices of mindfulness and yoga, and that's actually not merely coincidental, because through the influence, I don't have time to get into all the details of it, but through the influence of Alexander the Great Greek leader and king and emperor, if you will, and warrior, he went all the way into India, and we know that there was a fair amount of interaction between ancient Buddhism and ancient Greek philosophy as well. And so I don't think it's merely coincidental that Stoicism has a lot of similarities with Buddhism. I think there were some genetic connections between them. But either way, the goal of Stoicism is, the word they would use is ataraxia, which means basically tranquility. The goal is to reach a state of tranquility that you can only achieve through apatheia, which you can hear the word apathy, but it's not quite apathy. Apatheia means freedom from passions. And the way you do that is through cognition, okay? So the idea is, it is a cognitive tradition coming out of Aristotle, saying that your mind can control your emotions. That's different than Plato. However, unlike the Aristotelian tradition, it says that the key is actually to be free of emotions, to get beyond them. Maybe you've seen the funny t-shirt or poster where it shows a picture of Darth Vader and says Vader's emotions. And for every picture, it's got angry, happy, sad, sleepy, confused, cheerful, frustrated, excited, proud. And it's the exact same picture because, of course, Darth Vader always looks the same. This would be sort of an example of Stoicism in the modern world. I guess we might say Darth Vader did have emotions, we don't know. But at least from the outside, he appears always to be the same, so that he has achieved tranquility, ataraxia, by freedom from his emotions, apatheia. This is the goal. And today, as I mentioned this golf book I'm reading, but it's actually more explicit than that. Stoicism is actually a big deal today. You can buy books, I've read them and I love them actually. You can buy little coins that remind you with cool Latin phrases like premeditatio malorum, summum bonum, and others that remind you of key Stoic principles so that today you can live in this modern, complicated world. You can get daily emails. You can get books of daily readings. I read the Daily Stoic every day because I find it very interesting and helpful at points. All of these coins and books and daily journals, etc., are designed to teach you to follow Stoic practices today. And what is the key? The key to Stoicism is to this question, and this is how it comes back to inside out, that the key to happiness is to be free from emotions. So what do you think? You think that's the way? Is that the key to happiness, to learn to be free from your emotions? What are emotions? They're affecting us all the time. How do you learn to process them? Well, in this first session, I've just begun the discussion of recognizing that today there are lots of opinions about them, everything from Pixar to neurologists to counselors. And in the ancient world, there was a lot of discussion of this. It was a key idea in philosophy. In the next section, we'll pick up and ask, what does the Bible say about emotions?
You got all that emotion that's heaving like an ocean, and you're drowning in a deep, dark well.